I'd like to call the meeting to order. The date today is July 22nd. We're calling the meeting to order at 6:23. Welcome to the Northern Region Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person in the Weber County Commission chambers in Ogden, Utah, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This is a public forum allowing you to express your opinions and proposals on the management of wildlife in our state. The RAC considers your ideas, opinions, and proposals and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting the wildlife policy for the state. We all have our ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife, and we approach this with tremendous emotion and passion. I encourage all who wish to express their opinion to do so. However, I ask that we respect opposing views on issues being discussed. I would appreciate the audience keeping their emotions in check, allowing all individuals to freely express their opinions. Appropriate conduct will provide smooth meeting flow and allow the RAC to listen, digest, and address all concerns, opinions, proposals offered for their consideration. Rude comments, booing, yelling, hooting, or snickering from the audience while individual comments are being offered will not be tolerated. If inappropriate behavior persists, the offender may be asked to leave the meeting. This time I'd like to welcome the RAC members and ask them to introduce themselves. I'll go first. My name is Mike Lauder. I'm a sportsman's rep out of Hooper, Utah, and tonight I'm filling in for Justin Oliver, who is excused from tonight's meeting, as well as Emily Jensko. And we'll start on our left. Both.
Junior Going, representing agriculture.
Hi, I'm Jamie Butler, and I'm representing non-consumptive users.
Darren Perry with the Shoshone Nation.
Paul Chase, representing the Forest Service out of Logan.
Randy Hutchison at large.
Matt Clark at large.
Brian Brown at large.
Nikki Wayment, and I'm representing the non-consumptive users.
David Earl, Agriculture.
Casey Snyder, elected official.
At this time, I'd like to welcome the DWR staff, especially those that provided presentations and are available to answer questions throughout the meeting. Chelsea Duke, Wildlife Lands Coordinator. Kenny Johnson, Administrative Service Section Chief. Would also like to welcome the public that are attending in person and that are watching on YouTube. Those that are attending in person will have the opportunity to provide comments regarding any agenda item. If you wish to make a comment, you must fill out a comment card for the item you wish to address and see that I receive it prior to the RAC discussion. The public that are watching on YouTube will not be able to provide live comments during the meeting. However, the presentation were provided for the viewing online, and public was able to provide comments to the RAC members for this meeting. Oh yes, I had. Sorry, Kevin. We missed you online. I was kind of looking at the stuff. It's been a while since I did this, so we have Kevin. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Can you hear us? Nope. He's talking. Okay.
Did you get that, Mike?
Who? Oh, and Bryce Thurgood has joined us online as well. Okay, at this time, I'd like to call for approval of the agenda and the past minutes. I'll take a vote on that now. Need a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Matt Clark made the motion.
I'll second it.
Randy Hutchinson seconds it. All in favor, raise your right hand, say aye. We can't vote, can we? Unanimous. Okay. What's next? Okay, so this is the summary motions and Ben Podolsky's gonna give us that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Pro Tem. I'll read the summary motions for the June 2nd, 2022 Wildlife Board meeting. First item was the upland game management plan that included the fall turkey permits and the air rifle recommendations. There was a motion made that failed for lack of a second. That motion was to allow only one either sex tag for the fall hunts and remove the public land from the fall hunts and set quotas not to exceed 1,500 for northern, 600 for central, 350 for southern, and leave the southeastern region as is. Again, that motion failed for lack of a second. Another motion was made and seconded and passed unanimously that we allow only one either sex tag for the fall hunts, remove public land from the fall hunts, and set a maximum cap of 25% less than the amount sold last year for each region. The following motion also passed unanimously, that we recommend to the legislature that we approve the list of hunts as presented, and that we recommend the legislature put forth a relatively significant state tax before this list can be implemented and could be hunted, and that we want to incentivize through this tax the industry to go to Pittman-Robertson, but that if this tax is not implemented, there can be no hunting with air guns. Next motion that passed unanimously was to approve the remaining recommendations as presented by the division. And for the sage grouse, there was a motion made to approve the Parker Mountain sage grouse hunt as presented, and that passed unanimously. Next item on the agenda was the landowner rule amendments. Motion was made and passed unanimously that we remove the section of rule requiring a loss of preference points from Rule R657-43. And the next motion was made and passed 5-1 with one abstention, that we approve the landowner permit rule amendments as revised and presented to the Wildlife Board today, and allow the division, the LOA committee, and the landowner association to bring back any recommended changes to the August, September RAC and board meetings. If no changes are brought forward, then the rule will stand as presented. Again, that passed 5-1. And the final motion that we asked the division to look into a youth-only dedicated hunter type program for youth ages 12 to 17 that would allow yearly participation with a harvest restriction, 2 deer in a 3-year period. And this item is to be placed on the action log, and that item passed unanimously. That's it, Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Ben.
Mhm. You okay on the regional update, Mike? Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna move to our first agenda item. R657-28 lands. Oh, I was below. Sorry. Region. We got the regional update. That's right. It's our first agenda item. Oh, the regional update. I'm sorry. You're supposed to give the regional update.
That's your way of saying you don't want to hear me talk anymore. I get it.
I thought you looked at me and says we're good. I went, all right, we're good. Move on. Doesn't want to give the regional update.
Our director's in the room, so I think I'll go ahead and give this one. Okay. Mike, you good? Perfect. Thank you. Okay. For the Northern Region update, go ahead and advance. Supporting wildfires, 'tis the season, especially in the Tooele Fillmore area. We're also going to be hosting the for National Association of Wildlife Enforcement Officers or something like that. So we'll be hosting a giant annual meeting in 2023. So we've got 4 officers from the region that are in Tennessee right now. They're getting kind of training and background on how to host that big convention. We put a lot of emphasis on wildlife management area enforcement. We'll be talking about wildlife management areas today as we bring up the lands rule. But our officers have been putting a ton of emphasis on enforcement issues that are popping up there. And we'll get to a little bit of that on the next slide. No, sorry, I'm not quite done there. You may have seen in the news that Utah took part in a record-breaking prisoner relocation effort. I'm proud to say that our officers participated in that and assisted the Department of Corrections. I don't know how many prisoners they moved, but they broke records and it sailed smoothly. They kept it kind of quiet because it was such a big deal, but appreciate their professionalism and lending a hand there. We've also been increasing the kind of the scope and scale of our canine program, and we're finding that they're really helpful for other agencies and helping them find guns and really helping them achieve their missions. So we're proud of that. And of course, we're going to be hiring new officers. We're always trying to hire new officers, it seems. Next slide. So I did talk about a lot of the challenges we've had on wildlife management areas. Not only do we provide a lot of law enforcement support, but our outreach section has really engaged heavily to address a lot of shooting and camping issues, particularly at the Millville Providence WMA. We put out a lot of media releases and really targeted social media messaging, and came up with a combined effort that really made a big difference. And we're happy to report that we're having fewer camping or shooting issues at that WMA. So there's no doubt that the public wants to use land. There's no shortage of need out there, but it's nice to see that when we put a focused effort into it, we can curtail a lot of the challenges that we have. Next slide, Mike. We also, for those of you that like to fish, I know that kayaking is becoming kind of an increasing interest amongst anglers. It's hard to, buy an entire fishing boat and all of the equipment and the gas that goes with it and everything. So kayaks are becoming a popular option. We hosted a beginner kayak fishing clinic at East Canyon Reservoir. We had quite a few members that were signed up, and it took place right before the gas prices just blew up. So we had a lot of people that were coming from a lot further who decided not to come because of gas prices. But for those that did participate, they gave really good reviews, and we do plan on holding it again because we think there's quite a few people that are interested in this opportunity. Next. Last meeting, we were introduced, 2 meetings ago, we introduced some of our new members of our habitat team, including Daniel Olson, who's in the crowd today. You'll hear from him if there's any regional questions on the lands rule today. But we also hired Shane Hill, who is hard at work. But at the time, we had a question mark on who was going to replace Pam Kramer. She does a lot of our impact analysis work. We ended up hiring Melissa early. Melissa comes to us. I try not to hold it against her. We're in Wildcat country here in Ogden, but she comes from the University of Montana. She is an exceptional talent. She previously was a Weber River watershed coordinator. She comes to us with a lot of relationships and connections with private landowners, specifically in areas where we could use a little bit of extra help there. She's an avid hunter and angler herself and brings just an immense amount of energy and talent to the table. So we're really happy to round out our regional habitat team and to finally be full staff. And man, I could give an entire presentation just on what those guys were doing right now, but they are so busy. So welcome Melissa to the team. If you guys get to meet her soon, I promise you won't be disappointed. Next slide, Mike. Probably our biggest area of emphasis for the habitat team and others is the Cinnamon Creek WMA. Some of you may have heard we'll be hosting a ribbon cutting from 6 to 8 p.m. on August 5th. That's a Friday. We do have a little bit of a limit on parking, so it's not an open invite to everybody and their mom, but I'm getting a look from Mike like
Everybody
everybody and their mom is coming. So no, we're really excited to do the ribbon cutting and to invite the public to come out and see the property that we, along with our partners, have purchased. And we've been doing quite a bit of work on road and fence repairs there. The parking area, you can see the photos that are in the presentation. The top photo is what it looked like before we started, and the bottom is what the parking area looks like now. That's just some of the work that our crew has been doing on the ground. Lots of road work still ahead. And we had hoped to have the dozer for another week. We lost the dozer today to another need. But for those of you that do come out to see the property, you'll see it. We're kind of in mid-management, and we'll always be managing the property, but we've got big plans there. We've got some funds set aside to continue the work that we're doing, both on the roads and the fences. But we also have a statewide range habitat, like range trend crew that travels the state, and they're in the region doing a survey of baseline condition on the property. So that'll help us understand what the current condition is and help us manage it toward better condition in the future. Next. Our wildlife section is busy on preseason elk and pronghorn counts. Our big game depredation counts continue to take place. Those are happening in the middle of the night. So if you're like me and you don't sleep much, give us a call. We've got plenty of counts going on in the middle of the night. Adam Brewerton's conducting a lot of bat mist netting surveys. He just wrapped up probably the last one this last week. And we've got a bat blitz coming up. That'll be in the Northeast region, I think next week. We're doing chucker camera surveys, working through renewal applications for cooperative wildlife management units. And we are definitely seeing an increased nuisance calls on bats and rattlesnakes. Quite a bit of media attention on rattlesnakes this time of year. So be careful out there if you're enjoying the outdoors. Next slide, Mike. Our fisheries crew has been really busy installing deep water habitat. We're doing projects at Andy Adams and Echo Reservoir. You can see our biologist, this is Cody Edwards. He is with the Forest Service now. We'll blame Paul for that. But he's throwing out sort of these deep water habitats that provide a lot of cover for various species that are particularly can be forage for bigger game species. So this is really helpful for ensuring that we get yellow perch, for example, to recruit to the next age class so that anglers can take advantage of them. We're also treating overabundant lily pads at Glassman Pond. If anybody's ever been there, that's a hard one to fish, but it's a beautiful little spot and close to home for a lot of folks. So we're doing treatments there to make it a better fishing opportunity. Next slide, Mike. And native fish and mollusks, you might not know that, but this is an important part of our mission. We are stewards of all wildlife in Utah, and that includes native fish and mollusks. So we do have a crew that's working on bluehead sucker population surveys on the Weber. That is an all hands on deck, huge effort, really hard work, days and days and days of just rowing and electro fishing the stream to look for blueheads. We also had, 'tis the season, we're running out of water in a lot of places, so we had to do an emergency transfer of least chub from Pilot Pond. That's a small pond out in West Box Elder County. And we've also found new populations of winged floater mussels in Ogden Bay and Salt Creek WMAs. So that's a kind of what might seem like a random finding, but it's really important for us as we continue to document native species and where they occur and where they don't. And that helps us ensure that we're managing those species for their future persistence and keeps them off of the SA listing radars. Also, we've on the South Fork of Junction Creek, it's another stream out in the West Desert, part of the Snake River system. We've built a diversion and fish passage system there as well. Next slide. If you're reading the newspaper at all or seeing anything in the media, you're seeing historically low lake levels at the Great Salt Lake. Those records continue to be set daily. Current elevations listed there. This is a huge area of emphasis for the region, but also for the division and for the department in particular. So a lot of attention and resources are being placed on the Great Salt Lake right now. Within our crew, we're doing a region-wide shorebird survey. That's requiring a lot of avian expertise throughout the region and the state to conduct. Next slide, Mike. We completed a successful Phragmites burn at Ogden Bay and Salt Creek. We planted food plots and shrubs at Farmington Bay, Ogden Bay, and Salt Creek. And our annual Phragmites project, which is Phragmites treatments with chemical means rather than burning. It's going to take place from about August 8th to September 9th. So a 1 month long effort, and it is hard work. Next slide, Mike. So just, I would like to include a few opportunities for RAC members. We do have some stream electrofishing surveys that are going to be coming up if anybody's interested. We were able to get a few members of the public on some of those, and they will always have a good time. Those elk and pronghorn classifications are taking place. Those will probably continue until the fall hunts start. So if anybody's interested in those, let us know. John Lupp does say the Shorebird surveys are pretty full at this point, but if you really hate yourself and you want to just sweat and see how hard the waterfowl crew works, the Phragmites treatment's for you, Jamie.
And the electrofishing.
And the electrofishing? Okay, gotcha. Anyway, if anybody is interested in doing any field work with our employees, you're always welcome. And these are just a few of the opportunities that are coming up. So give me a shout out if you have interest. I think that's it, Mike. Next slide. I think that's it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we can commence with the meeting.
I actually have one. And you know it's going to be about birds. So when is the chapter survey going to be completed?
I'd have to check the calendar. I'll actually look while we're having a meeting. Anything else? Okay, that was easy. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
All righty, I'll introduce our first agenda item. It's the R657-28 Land Use Rule Amendments by Chelsea Duke, Wildlife Lands Coordinator. No presentation will be given. All RAC members will have been asked to view the presentation on the DWR website prior to the meeting.
Pull these down here because I'm so tall. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to answer questions about our proposed rule changes for our 657-28 use of division lands. We also have Daniel Olson here, our habitat manager in the northern region, who can assist with questions very specific to the northern region.
It seemed like to me when I watched the presentation that it was kind of just a common sense thing to consolidate a lot of the stuff into one area. It didn't look like anything really changed. It just looked more like housekeeping to me. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Specifically, how we process permits and easements and property rights. We wanted to make it very clear to users. We've received some feedback over the years that it can be redundant at times. It's hard to follow. And so we really wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping to make sure that everybody was really understanding when and where we're using these specific permitting types.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about motorized vehicles?
Yeah.
How does the division deal with people that maybe aren't able-bodied and can't walk in on their own? Are there provisions for that?
So we looked at a lot of different definition of motorized vehicles. We looked at Forest Service definitions. We looked at other how other state agencies are defining motorized vehicles, and everyone was really specific that motorized vehicles does not include any wheelchairs or electric scooters of any time that are used to help unable bodies persons. So we felt that our definition of motorized vehicles, specifically where we gave examples of said motorized vehicles, was specific to anything with a motor to help propel a person, specifically to this rule, to use land.
Thank you.
Okay, quick question for you. Kind of piggyback on that a little bit. You touch base on e-bikes. And you included class 2 and class 3 as motorized.
Mhm.
Why didn't you include class 1? And then give us, if you could, an overall philosophy, what you're looking at or what direction you're
Great
wanting to
question.
go there.
So we went back and forth on this a lot. I think a lot of people would, of course, just like to see no e-bikes on WMAs. We specifically wanted to exclude class 1 from our definition of motorized vehicles because that's what's in the waterfowl rule. So when you're on waterfowl management areas, you can use a class 1 bike. And we didn't want the definition to be different than waterfowl management areas. So this specific rule deals with division lands. So that in our book is all lands, not just specific to WMA. So I didn't want to contradict what was already in the waterfowl rule. We also talked to law enforcement a lot about what we're seeing on the ground and our habitat managers, where you can see that for those unfamiliar, class 1 can only be propelled with your feet. If the motor doesn't kick in unless you are propelling the bike yourself, and it goes up to 20 miles an hour. Class 2 has a throttle, and you don't need to be pedal assist with that one, so that can cause a little bit more habitat damage. And then class 3 can go up to 28 miles an hour. So we're getting more into like motorcycle territory there. And so we felt with class 2 and 3, we were concerned about habitat and the destruction that you would see with class 2 and 3. We didn't feel that class 1 was going to cause as much damage as class 2 and 3. And it's also really similar to a mountain bike. So if we're going to restrict class 1, then are we going to restrict mountain bikes? And then we get into other territories. So that was the reasoning behind 2 and 3.
Okay. No, appreciate that. So this is just personal bias I'm throwing out here. I knew that exception would come back to bite us. I'm very conservative in this regard. Any thought on connecting this language to the language in the waterfowl management rather than having it separate? So if something changes in one area, it will automatically affect the other.
We have talked about that specifically since this rule deals with division lands and we define division lands as all division lands. It can feel disconnected to have a different rule. I think that whatever comes out of this, if this is not consistent with the waterfowl rule, we're going to have to make some changes.
Thank you.
And so pretty much the definition with the vehicles comes to anything with a throttle. So we have technology out there of single wheel vehicles that can carry gear with an electric motor and a throttle. Does that fall under this, where it doesn't carry a person? Is it a vehicle? Is it not?
It's a great question too. We put in that definition self-propelled, like so it could propel a person. And so we talked about tools such as that are used in the aid of hunt. And we felt that it was inappropriate to include definitions like that are specifically for what the properties are meant for. They're meant for wildlife. And so if you're a hunter and you're going in once and out once, you're not creating trails as much as you would be if you were on. It's a lot easier to create a trail that people are going to continuously use with a class 2 or class 3 or motorcycle of some kind.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the RAC members?
Sorry, what? Not even said I wasn't going to say anything this meeting. Was there any discussion on what I'm going to call the creep into WMAs? Like lots of things take place on WMAs now that aren't wildlife centered at all. I'll give an example of one. And I know people enjoy this, and I have a mountain bike. I ride a mountain bike. But like Timpanogos, WMA, for example, huge mountain biking use is taking place there. In my opinion, and this is my opinion only, that can be counterproductive to the wildlife there. So what discussion took place as far as trying to manage or limit, or if any discussion about the types of activities that take place?
Yeah, so the hard thing when we're talking about unlawful uses of division lands is it has to be one size fits all. You know, we have a lot of WMAs where we have really specific problems. And so to help with situations like that, we've given regions the ability to restrict certain activities through signage. So you'll see in the unlawful uses section that there's a place where if it's signed against that said use, you may not do that activity. And that's just as strong for law enforcement to enforce as no motorized vehicles. So if there is a specific problem, such as on Timpanogos, our habitat staff can sign against all e-bikes, even class 1 on specific WMAs. So we're giving people the flexibility within the division to help cut down on some of those uses that we see hurting habitat.
Okay, perfect. I didn't see that in there, so thank you.
Oh, sorry. Casey.
Some of the little kids take.
Oh, sorry. I couldn't see you over the top there, Casey. Sorry, buddy. No, not at all. Just really couldn't see it.
So I want to piggyback on that last question. So there is a clear, or needs to be a clear understanding that division property set aside for wildlife.
Can you talk into the mic or the other mic? Agree.
Do you want me to stand up too? Can you see me okay? All right. So back to what I'll try and restate this. So, division properties specifically on the WMA side are set aside for wildlife. Again, piggyback on that previous question. Now, I know that you're working to address it as a one size fits all thing, but is there need either making this more robust or even going further in state statute to clarify that there are a lot of uses that are occurring on WMAs that are actually quite detrimental to the wildlife for which they were set aside for. And that goes against maybe some of the dollars that were used to procure those properties or the management objectives of those properties. So in your discussions, Are you feeling like there maybe needs to be something a little more robust in state code? Do you feel like you have the discretion to really manage wildlife properties for wildlife? Can you give us a little bit of context on that?
No, I think this is a great point that really deserves a lot of discussion. We did put one piece, and I'm looking for it right now as we're talking, but we stuck a little section in here saying that the properties are not, here we go, management of division land. So you'll see R657 28-3, we put section 3. Nope, section 2, my apologies. It is not a primary objective of these properties to be managed for other non-wildlife uses. So we did put that in there because that was something that we were lacking within this current administrative role. I think your question also needs to call into fact that we have to be able to enforce. So, you know, we can add a lot of administrative rules and we can make a lot of unlawful uses, but if we don't have the law enforcement personnel to go out and enforce said rules, that can be difficult.
So I'm reading that now, if I may, Mr. Chair, follow up. So it's not a primary objective for these properties to be managed for other non-wildlife uses. Why didn't you just say it is a primary objective to manage these properties for wildlife? Why sort of going the other way?
Well, that's fair. I think you could say that too. Yeah, I think that's mostly what we were trying to say.
Yeah, there's like some double negatives in here, but
That's fair.
I'm just, and part of the reason I'm asking this, so the division, this is a discussion that's obviously we're having here now. It's a real problem. Millville was brought up, Providence is brought up. The division did some amazing things on the Little Bear here in the last little bit. And I think we're headed to additional conflicts if we're not pretty aggressive in terms of wildlife properties are for wildlife. Now, the other things can occur in them, but I'm wondering if maybe we need to strengthen this a little bit more to set the stage. I don't know. So thank you.
I think any clarification we collectively can make would be helpful. We did bring up a couple examples in the regional update, but I don't think a day goes by in the region or in the central region either, where we aren't talking about conflicts with other uses on our lands. And so we do need help. There's a lot of historical uses that have been going on for a long time, and there are, pretty passionate users and passionate user groups. And so to take away those uses is really difficult for us to do. But where we feel like it's most important is where it's having a negative effect on wildlife, and any clarification that could be made in rule or code, I think would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, come on, Haley. This is Haley Blair. She is one of our wildlife lands specialists.
Thanks, everybody. So just to kind of speak to that a little bit, as someone who issues these permits and deals with people applying, having a rule that explicitly shows when you need a permit and when you don't is really helpful in those kinds of situations. So if we're spelling out, you're having a family reunion with 50 people, you need to get an SUP. We're kind of tightening that up a little bit of when you need a permit and when you can just go out and do what you want. And with that in mind, a lot of easements, real property rights that we're granting to people that are applying with these WMAs that are purchased with federal dollars, we're required to get essentially permission from like Fish and Wildlife Service before we can issue these easements, and prove to them that it's not detrimental to the purpose for which the property was purchased. So it's not as tight as we would like it, but it's moving in that direction of resources to the public of, do you need an SUP? Do you need an easement? Here's the process you're going to have to follow. And here's the other agencies that we're going to have to work through.
Chair, can I ask a follow-up to
Yes.
that? But there's a gradation though, right? So 50 people on a mountain bike in one, because they all have the same last name and they want to go I don't know. I think bicycles are dumb. So whatever they do, no offense to you mountain bikers, but okay. So that's a conditional use permit, right? Or special use permit, but 50 unrelated people, all of whom are individuals still having the same impact, are not required to have a permit, right? And so how are you differentiating unless you're clear in rule that 50 people using it once and 50 individuals using it every day are like, you're treating them different on the regulatory side? How are you going to get it around the actual on the ground portion of that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand your question. And like Chelsea said, a lot of that just boils down to law enforcement and what we're able to actually enforce. And these aren't my notes, so I don't know, but we did define a special use permit. If you are doing an activity on division lands, it requires a special use permit if there's any commercial gain. If it's an organized event with a like roster or attendee list, any research, anything like that. So we are, defining that in a more detailed way than the public might have been aware of in the past. So, it's not perfect. If people individually go out there, that does have an impact. But I think this is a really good step in the right direction to start managing those things a little bit better.
No, and I appreciate the position. Please don't take any of these questions in a negative context, because they're not meant as such. I'm just trying to figure out how to help you do what I think you're trying to accomplish here. So this is helpful. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and like Chelsea mentioned before, we have a lot of discretion within the region, and that's why we hire a lot of expertise. But our default answer, if someone's asking that, well, hopefully they ask, to be honest with you, there's a lot of unauthorized uses on our lands that are creating permanent trails that are never authorized. But our default response would be no. There would be far fewer exceptions than there would be those that we would allow. So,
may I speak to that?
Absolutely.
And I think what we have and are able to do in this rule is capture those folks that do ask those questions. Can we do this? Is this allowable? But you are correct. It's those 50 individual users that technically are not breaking any administrative rules, but are causing irreparable damage.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can you, thinking about what we've talked about so far, can you tell maybe us a little bit about the issues that are happening on WMAs? We've talked about motorized vehicles, we've talked about bicycles, we've talked about creating trails, but it seems like in your presentation, Ben, it was more about shooting and camping, and I'm wondering what other issues we might be needing to think about.
Sure. So if there's an activity that can happen, it's happening on a WMA somewhere. I'm being sort of sarcastic, but not really. You'd be surprised with what we do find. And if we weren't constantly vigilant, it would continually get out of hand. A couple examples, like, maybe we don't take a one size fits all draconian approach to saying no to everything, because there might be an opportunity for us to be a good neighbor to a municipality. And they might have a trail plan that they want to connect from north to south along the foothills of their community. And that might need to clip a corner of our WMA, and it's not going to have any impact on wildlife. And that's something that we should have the ability and the discretion to allow. In the Millville Providence example, we have a trail like that where the city has been a really good steward of the trail. A lot of people use it. It doesn't have an impact. It's something that we're comfortable with. But at the same time, there are a lot of people that like to find free places to shoot. Even though we have the Cache Valley Hunter Ed Center in that valley, they go up to that WMA. And the picture that I showed was a sign that said no shooting. There's a trail behind there. And people go there and they shoot, and it's a safety concern for the trail users behind it. And so in that exact same area, we also have no camping because it's a road. And people are camping pretty much in the middle of the road almost. So we have no overnight camping allowed. We have day use areas. They turn those into overnight areas. We have a lot of homeless that find refuge in these areas that pretty much take up full-time residence. We have a lot of property being dumped. So campers that are left unattended for the duration of a season, they might not even be registered. And so you can't track down who the owner is. lots and lots of different things. We've had our Middle Fork WMA, for example, we were requested by a number of neighbors to take a lot closer and harder management, closer look and a lot more strict management of camping there because there was overnight parties happening that were disruptive to the neighbors and they were very unsafe. We had recreational shooting happening there and we had bullet holes in neighboring properties, like in the homes. We had very serious type 1, part 1 crimes that were taking place, violent crime. So those are the kinds of things that can happen when there's no one looking. And it's our job to make sure we're looking, but it's also our job to make sure we're not providing opportunities when we're not, if that helps.
Yeah.
Any more questions from the RAC?
Looking under, I guess, the special use portion of that, that's not called out specifically, but guides and outfitters, if they operate on a WMA, I'm assuming are required because of the commercial aspect of it. There's commercial gain there. They're required to get a special use permit.
Correct. So in the June 2021 Wildlife Board meeting, the board decided that we were going to require special use permits for waterfowl guiding. This wasn't put into the waterfowl rule. And so we have talked about that, and that actually came up at our RAC meeting last night at the Central Region, and they made a motion to add, in addition to all of the called out definitions of what a special use permit could be, they asked us to also put in a proposal for adding guiding and outfitters. So I think with the current way it stands, it still falls under commercial gain, and so we would still require it. However, they felt like calling it out specifically would be a good edit. So I agree.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the RAC? Seeing no more questions, are there questions from the public? We don't have a card up here, so it doesn't look like we have questions from the public. We're going to ask Ben to summarize the public comments received for the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this item, we had 7 total votes for the region. 2 strongly agreed, 1 somewhat agreed, 3 neither agreed nor disagreed, 1 somewhat disagreed, and 0 strongly disagreed. There really wasn't any extra comments provided on this item. The comments that were provided were actually related to item number 2, which we'll discuss a little bit more here shortly. So that's all we've got for public input.
Okay, is there, we'll open it up for comments from the public. And again, we don't have a card, so we'll move right along. Are there any RAC discussion, including any clarification or additional information from the RAC members?
Just a quick, this comment here.
Okay. Yep, it's from us.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I actually like what you've done a lot. As I say, the only thing, but as I say, I'm still really like what you've done. The only thing is holding me back from saying like, hey, instead of having all these double negatives in there, I think we're stuck having to do that because every WMA is so different. But as long as we have strong signage in there so that we can go through and start eliminating things, I like that. So that's the only reason. Otherwise, I'd say like, no, let's just put in there this only. But there's been so many years of various uses. One thing I would like for some consideration in the future, I'm not certain there's a place for camping in WMAs. I just don't see it. I don't think now's necessarily the time to do that unless the board agrees or disagrees. But I wanted to plant a seed, especially like the Cinnamon Creek. That's a great area. But there's no reason. I mean, to camp there, you have to go in and you're in the middle of the WMA. There's others getting back to where signage was really good, right? That, like up in Hardwood Ranch, there's our places where right off the paved road that, yeah, okay, that's reasonable. But I'm not a fan. I just want to plant that for future consideration. Not sure it's an appropriate activity.
I think I'm going to just comment to Randy's suggestion. I think it like you said, you can't, it's not one size fits all. And I think there'll be consideration made for those. I disagree wholeheartedly about the Cinnamon Creek. I think if you didn't allow camping there, I don't think people would use it because it's a pretty good John up the hill. So I think with the new improvements to the parking lot, it doesn't force people to drive in there. And most of the camping that takes place inside the unit or inside the WMA is done out of a tent off the back of a four-wheeler. So it's just not the same in different scenarios. So that's my comment on that. Thanks, Chelsea. Any other comments from the RAC? Okay. Good job, Chelsea. Appreciate you doing that.
Thank you all.
This time I'd entertain a motion.
I'll do it.
Okay.
I'd make the motion to accept the proposal as presented.
Okay, so we have Randy made the motion and Brad has seconded it. Now we'll take a vote. All in favor? Okay, which motion? You didn't specify, just accepting it?
Yeah.
Okay,
just
no, okay.
no.
Okay, accepting as presented. We'll take a vote now. All in favor of accepting as presented, raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Casey Snyder, show that the record reflect that Casey Snyder is opposed. You got the count on that. And we'll, while we've got Casey, we'll have him kind of make mention of his opposition to this acceptance.
No, I actually support fundamentally what you're trying to do here. The double negative piece is something I think we need to work through. I do think that we should go further than what we've done in terms of prioritizing properties for wildlife. If Pittman Robinson money's going into it, if license fees are going into these grounds, like we should be managing for wildlife. So again, nothing hostile, but I think maybe we could go a little further. So
thank you, Casey. Okay, we're going to move on to the next agenda item at this time. This will be the proposed fee schedule. Kenny Johnson, Administrative Services and Section Chief, will be answering questions for us. Thanks, Kenny. Are there any questions from the RAC members for Kenny regarding
Before we get too deep into this, can I just clarify one point that I wish in hindsight I would have included in my presentation initially?
Sure.
So is this thing working? We good,
You
Mike?
got to pull them in close.
Both
Yeah,
mics.
both mics.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. One of the things I failed to mention in the presentation that I wish I would have is we in legislative session 19, fiscal 20, a couple of years ago, we had gone and asked for a pretty significant increase to non-resident fees to cover some staffing needs and personnel and current expenses at the time. And I thought that was a little more common knowledge and understood out there, and found out last night's RAC meeting that maybe wasn't the case. And so we did raise fees pretty significantly for non-residents just a couple short years ago. And so that I just wanted to kind of preface that with tonight's discussion. And then clarify that when we looked at it this time around for residents, we started with kind of a holistic approach to everything top to bottom and trying to maybe modernize the fee schedule. And so we looked at it from top to bottom at about a 10% increase for residents. And then we tried to do some pointed strategic moves to kind of right size things. So you'll see the birds, for example, turkey and swan, just kind of right sizing those to the similar opportunity. That was a big part of it, or to just make sure we're still competitive in the resident, non-resident world. And so that was
something that came up in a number of the responses, the email responses, was comparing us to other states around us. I just want to give you a chance to expound on that a little bit if you have the insight, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the vast majority of Utah's DWR budget comes from licenses and fees that are charged. I don't know if that's the case with the state surrounding us. I didn't know if you could add some insight to that.
Yes. So definitely a fair question. And I think the the easiest way to look at it, it's kind of hard apples to apples with the surrounding states because they all have different priorities, different funding mechanisms, different dependencies on residents and non. And so it's hard to say, why don't you do it this way or that way or the other? It's apples to oranges really in that world. But I do think overall, kind of overarching to everything, we are very competitive. I think until the non-resident increase recently, we might not have been competitive on the low side for Utah. And we feel like we right-sized that a couple of years ago and now have just built a little bit onto that this time. So it's hard to say one way or the other that it's a fair comparison straight across for any state. But I feel like the balanced and kind of puts us right in line with everything that our sister states certainly do in the Western states.
Okay, just a quick follow-up on it. It's different, but why I've got the microphone. And I'll get it out of the way up front. I like this change, but I'm wondering what drove it, because it's not the 10% that you kind of targeted. In the dedicated hunters, you're jumping from $20 to $40. What was the logic behind it?
The idea there is to kind of return that program to its roots, where people go look for meaningful projects on the ground and get stuff done, and not just come in last minute and pay for hours. It really was to hopefully provide some incentive to just, early on look for a good solid project and go complete it.
Bless you. I've been out leading projects, and I've had dedicated hunters just bluntly tell me, I will never do this again. I'll just buy out my hours. So it needs $40 would be, in my opinion, the bare minimum on that. So I like that change a lot. Thank you.
Any other questions from the RAC for Kenny?
I know it came up last, seeing the increase on the multi-season elk tag. So the single season elk permit went up, I think $6. And then we jumped the multi-season by $50. Seemed, I guess, not quite in line with just seeing that jump up that far. And I'm just a little curious why not match? Previously, we had matched it to the cost of 3 single season tags.
Yeah, I think the value of that one was worth looking at a little bit different market price. So instead of just the 3 seasons, the value and the interest in I think the popularity of that one, we looked at it more from a value to the constituent.
Was there any, I see the youth multi-season is the same price as the adult. Was there discussion there of keeping that one cheaper?
On the youth, we specifically wanted to keep youth prices the same across the board, and the same for our disabled veterans.
Okay, any other questions from the RAC members?
I have a question. I always have questions
okay.
too.
That's what we do.
So if you don't get this increase, what programs will go away, or what will happen?
We hope, Jamie, that this will go through, and we hope it'll carry us, 4, 5, 6 years into the future. We haven't come to ask for an increase for resident fees in a long time. It'll be almost 10 years if it does go through and it's implemented next summer. And so we feel really fortunate that we're not having to make those hard decisions. And so we going into it with a positive attitude about it. And then, if not, we'd do what we always do. We have to annually analyze our expenses and revenue and just kind of make those decisions as they come up.
So can I follow up too? I think a lot of the value that DWR has is in the amazing people that work at the division and that carry this knowledge and this institutional kind of history. And so I was curious if your employees had cost of living increases, or if that has kind of been on hiatus.
In recent memory, it's been pretty good. I think up on the hill they've been pretty good to us. So they have had some COLAs over the years, and we definitely appreciate all of that. And like we've talked about before, just trying to retain that talent is important. It's hard to, I was talking to somebody the other day, and when you have a good, diligent state employee, they're almost like having 2 or 3 new ones just because they know everything and they've seen it all and they know who to contact and how to do the job and all of those things. And so it's definitely important to try to retain them.
I guess just personally, I've heard maybe some dissatisfaction from some employees that don't feel like they're getting paid enough and just want to recognize that that's something that I would think about in this time of like inflation of everything going wackadoodle with prices. So yeah.
And that's a big reason why we're here, to try to address some of those concerns for sure.
And my other, a couple, I guess this kind of is a 2-part question. I noticed there was a line for commercial hunting areas, and that fee didn't go up. Why is that? What?
So that section specifically down toward the bottom of that has a lot to do with our CORs, and we decided to not increase a lot of those at this time, just because they're already working, they're in place, they're fine. They don't generate a ton of revenue on top. They kind of just cover the cost of issuing a lot of times. And so we decided to keep CORs kind of where they were.
I have one more question. What other, has the division thought about other sources of revenue than just like raising fees? Because I don't know, I know a lot of your money comes from, hunting and fishing licenses, but I guess I don't have a full picture of like where everything comes from.
Yeah, we definitely are always interested in finding ways to cover our needs on the ground. So, I think the federal piece is big. That often gets misunderstood. So the more people that buy a hunting or fishing license, the more match essentially the federal government provides through the excise taxes. And so trying to get more people participating, it rewards that cycle, if that makes sense. So the more people that do it, the more that gets recognized and federal dollars return to the state for some of that too. So that's one avenue that we do pursue a lot.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the RAC?
I have one.
Okay.
So from Jamie's first question, you're telling us that you're committing part of these license fees to increasing the employees' salaries, especially those with the boots on the ground?
Yes, our personnel costs continue to go up. And so that is a big part of what we're asking to do.
And when will that be implemented? Would that be this year?
So a lot of it has happened. There's been some recent increases that have allowed us to make some of those adjustments, usually through the legislative session. And so some of this is in response to looking ahead and making sure we can cover the cost of some of those. There's been some decent increases as recently as the start of this fiscal year a month ago. So
well, I'm kind of with Jamie. I'm hearing some dissatisfaction in your program, and that, like all programs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did just clarify one thing with the PR dollars. Are they based on number of hunting licenses sold or on the amount of money that came from those licenses? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we do is we certify the number of unique people who buy a license. So if you bought multiples, you just get counted once. So it's the number of unique purchasers.
Any other questions for Kenny? Oh,
I have a question. Sorry. So part of my question is clarification, as always. I'm wondering, well, first let me ask this question. So for the waterfowl, for both the swan and the sandhill crane, I feel like at our previous meeting, there was a lot of discussion about the take of those specifically. And I'm wondering why, this might make me really unpopular. I'm wondering why the increase for residents isn't greater when the increase for non-residents seems pretty steep, from like $17 to $125, whereas for residents it's $15 to $40. So I'm wondering if there's some, I'm all in favor of giving breaks and not having people come from out of state to kill our birds. I'm happy to do that, but I'm just wondering if there's a reason behind that.
So the thought process behind that one was to kind of standardize the opportunity. So we looked at it and kind of compared it to turkey. And so it's a limited opportunity. It's a bigger bird. And so we just decided to standardize at the turkey rates.
Okay. And then like I said, my other question was clarifying. Can you tell me what the difference is between just I'm going to use the word regular cougar and bear permit versus the pursuit permit?
So the first one would be a permit where the person could harvest a cougar or bear, and pursuit is more just for the ability to pursue and chase, and then maybe tree one and train dogs and not actually harvest at the end of that.
Oh, so they don't kill it.
Correct.
Okay. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions from the RAC?
Mike, I've got one.
This time I'll open it up to the public. Are there questions from the public?
Chair, I've got a question.
Kevin, go ahead and tell him to ask his question. I'll relay it to.
Kevin, go ahead and ask your question. Mike says he'll relay it to us.
So in the comments that we got from the public, and I don't know whether it's something that you can address because it really doesn't have anything to do with fees, but some of the public comment mentioned that the state would make more money and not have to raise fees if they didn't use certain vendors for the expos and those sorts of things. They would make more money somewhere else. I just think that that's a good thing to dispel that rumor, because I know that there's a procurement process that the state goes through and a competitive process. I just really feel strongly, and had other people comment that
might
needs
be
to be cleared up.
Actually, if you listen to the question, you could maybe, because the half hour that's going to take Mike to relay it to you. We could see it on the screen. Kevin, can you go through that one more time? Mike had the headphones and now he's handing them off to Kenny.
Okay, so in the comments that we've received from the public, there were several comments that mentioned that you wouldn't need to increase some of these fees if they used a different vendor for the expo, specifically the Elk Foundation. And I know from experience that we having problems. Can you hear me okay?
Affirmative. Yes, we can.
Okay, so it just something that I need. I know that the state has very strict procurement policies and procedures and competitive. I just think that rumor needs to be dispelled so that people don't think that we're in conjunction with CFW instead of using a procurement process.
No.
So if I can remember right, a couple of the questions that came in through the process in email maybe had to do with they're only doing this because of if I got the gist of it right, that so we can keep doing the expo with the current contractor. And
no,
I think the question realizes that the end part of that was, can we dispel that myth? And these two are completely unrelated. So they do not correlate with one another at all.
Okay, to move along. We're good. We don't have a card, so we do have a card. Where are we at? Lost my place. Okay, this is from Ben. Ben's going to summarize the agenda.
Okay.
Comments received from the agenda.
Yeah, so for this item, we had considerably more input. We had 19 votes total. The largest amount were 9 that were strongly disagreed to the proposal. And then there was a pretty even distribution of 3 or 2 across the strongly agree, somewhat agree, neither agree nor disagree, and somewhat disagree. To provide a little bit of context, there was quite a few comments that were provided in the space where we allowed additional input. Obviously, people are concerned about increased fees. People are seeing increases in the cost to buy goods through inflation. There's concerns about recession. There are increases taking place through truth and taxation with local governments. So there's a lot of sentiments shared in the comments about rising costs everywhere people turn, including here. There was also some sentiment shared that why we aren't looking more at the non-resident fees rather than just residents, some of which we've discussed already. And there was some discussion about the dedicated hunter hourly rate increase as well.
Thanks, Ben. This time we'll call for public comment. I have one card from Chris Carling. He'll be representing SFW today.
Yeah, thank you again, Chris Carling with Sportsman for Fish and Wildlife. Just a couple of points in support of this that we'd like to make. The need for the increase seems very clear, number one, and we feel that smart and effective wildlife management that Utah enjoys must be adequately funded. The proposed modest increases do not represent any real burden. I know that's debatable, but in reality, we feel it's very modest and not a burden at all. And so for those reasons and others, SFW does support the fee schedule as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
you. Any other discussion, clarification, or additional information for the RAC members? It's okay.
I have another question about a lot of the comments talked about kind of sliding scales or maybe special permits for people like students or civic employees. I mean, what consideration is given to that, or, sliding scales so that, all people can participate in hunting and fishing?
So pardon me, Jamie, can you repeat that? I was following it, but I'm not 100% sure what you mean by the sliding scale.
I guess part of what I get concerned about is that a lot of this does cost a lot, right? Guns and hunting fees, and it would be nice to have it be equitable so people could all participate in hunting and fishing. And so have you thought about either some kind of sliding scale, based on income, or a discount I know some people get discounts, military and stuff, but can you just comment on the equity part of how much it costs?
We do try to be very cognizant of that. And that's why we've kept youth really low, disabled veterans really low. We haven't asked for increase there. So there are decent price breaks we hope in there for families, for youth, just starting into the hunting and fishing world at 11, 12, 13, maybe even earlier that with some of the hunting opportunity out there. They get really significant discounts, and then up through 18, they get really nice discounts as well. And then over 65, we have a tier there that they get a discount from the main fee as well. So we think we do a pretty nice job of that, and the participation statistics seem to bear that out.
Thank you for answering all of my questions. I sure appreciate you. Thank you.
At this time, I'd entertain a motion. If there's no more discussion, but it didn't look like there was. We have no more comment cards, so.
If no one's going to, I will. But I'm okay with it. I propose that we accept the presentation as presented.
So Randy Hutchinson made the motion and Matt Clark seconded. All right, let's call for a vote. All in favor of accepting as presented, raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? 2 opposed. Let the record show that 2 opposed. I don't have the It passes. I mean, obviously, there were two that were opposed. I'm not going to come to you, Kevin, for you to tell us, because I think that's kind of a difficult process to go through, unless you'd like to try to tell us what your conflict was or why you voted against. Did you
I
agree?
did not vote against it. I voted for it.
We're good? Okay. Jamie. Oh,
I just got back from the grocery store buying supplies for 6 sheepers. I just think the timing is wrong. I'm all for taking care of our wildlife as much as anybody, but I just think it's the wrong time.
And I can
Thank you,
echo that. I see the need. I feel for that. But I had a neighbor come over last night, a single mom, and I promised her I'd vote against it because she said it might price me out of being able to go with some of my family. And I just thought, well, that's one less person that's going to go out now because of it. But I absolutely feel for you and see the need. I just made a promise last night to a good neighbor who struggles to make ends meet with the inflation.
And I had a personal email to this exact same point. Young man with a family says, I just can't afford an increase. Thank you.
thank you, Junior. Thank you, Darren. I think that concludes it. I guess we can take a motion to adjourn at this time.
Make a motion.
Have the record show that Brad made the motion to adjourn. Need a second? Randy Hutchinson is the second. All in favor of adjourning, right hand say aye. Aye. Show it unanimous. Thank you, everyone, for attending the RAC. Have a great evening. Be safe.